that we'll talk about in the session. And because quality is actually really, really important in Agile, as Capers says, quality is the factor that affects schedule more than anything else, there are practices that Agile teams, engineering practices and design practices that are really essential for the Agile team to be using. And they won't be developing them all at the same time, but here are some of the things we'll talk about. Collective ownership of the code, refactoring of the code so that we make sure that it's clean, using a simple design for the actual product, and potentially using pair programming. Those are some examples of practices. The other thing is that there's something called the V&V, verification and validation. And we'll talk about how we go from business requirements all the way up to validation with user acceptance testing. And the cool thing is in Agile, we actually collapse the V by thinking about user acceptance testing and the criteria for validation. This helps us then find the steel rod of the requirements that we're then going to wrap variations around. And we use this actually in planning as well as in delivering a single discrete requirement, often using user stories as the form. So that's a real key practice for planning as well. So the team uses continuous integration of the code, customer acceptance tests, a 10-minute build so the whole code base can quickly be built, test-driven development, a very, very key quality practice, and version control is obviously important. So these are some of the things we'll also touch on in the session. And then finally, we'll end with some practices for adapting Agile. There's various styles and patterns that I've observed and other coaches have observed. We'll look at some of those options, including having an enterprise transition committee, doing a pilot, having an impediment or organizational change management backlog, etc. Thank you.
Well done. So we'll see how well mine transitions. Good morning, everybody. I'm Linda Cook. I am currently the resident Agile coach at General Dynamics IT. I work in Maryland, and in a section of General Dynamics, how many people think General Dynamics makes weaponry systems, things like that? Any idea at all? Yeah. I happen to work in the division that supports healthcare, and we're going to talk today about some companies that actually have used these Kanban techniques, right? If anyone's been through Disney in the last couple of days, or you will go through, trust me, Disney is one of the biggest proponents of queue management, and that's really what Kanban is about, is understanding how to create a good flow of work. Now, in order to do that, one of the things we have to do is take the waste out of our system. I'm guessing most folks here are familiar with the term garbage in, garbage out. What Kanban helps us do is to look at things from a lean perspective, eliminate the waste in the system so that we can actually have the best flow. Now, I'm here today asking that everyone in the analyst world and in the project management world really take on this effort and don't just leave it to the software engineers in your organization to be concerned with how are we going to make development go faster. Because a lot of people hear flow, they think going faster. The fact of the matter is, the way you go faster is by learning how to control your WIP limits. And to that, we're going to talk today about the theory of constraints. John Little is the person who is really credited with understanding how flow works and the push and pull on the systems. So with that, quality is a key aspect. And what, let's see here. I'm going to talk a little today about what Kanban is not. I believe Kanban is not a software development methodology, regardless of what David Anderson says. It is a technique. It's a very good technique. And David is an expert in using Kanban, but I'll differ from him in a little bit. What it really is a technique to use to control work in progress. It helps us really support incremental change, and it does require us to use our current processes, different from many of the other methodologies. Kanban's a technique that can be applied to whatever it is you're doing today, and we'll talk about that later this morning. There's some core properties that are important to know about Kanban. The very first thing you have to do is visualize your workflow, essential. Then learn how to limit work in progress. Right? Once you get your limits out there, the next thing you have to do is then manage the flow. And that's one of the tuning efforts that happens in Kanban, this essential part of the quality. So Kanban's all about delivering quality. We generally want to drive work in process down so that we can deliver much more often and make sure we have a good balance of demand against throughput. Right? In order to do that, you're going to prioritize your work and then look for where places are really varying. Right? Now, how many of you just had the hair stand up on the back of your neck, slack, in project management? I can tell you how many times I've been looked at cross-eyed by a VP when I said, we need a little slack in this plan. You absolutely need slack in your systems in order to inspect and adapt, right? The other thing you need to do is to actually create a nice rhythm or cadence, right? And by creating that cadence will enable the flow to happen. Let's see here. Stuck for 20 seconds.
It's the cadence.
It's the cadence, yes, right. Now, so Kanban methods are actually very good at helping us visualize, right? And we'll talk more today and actually create some visual boards of the work that you do in your day-to-day work. And once you actually visualize that workflow, the bottlenecks jump out at you pretty quickly, right? And then once you have your bottlenecks identified, you can determine which one of those are really getting in your way. Now, looking at why do we do WIP limits, right? We want to do WIP limits to allow us to actually say, something's broke here, we need to stop. Swarm as a group, solve the problem, and then get the line going again. This technique will also help you actually collaborate so that you're not just looking in your particular silo. So another technique that's very helpful when using Kanban is to actually define classes of service. Right? So you want to understand what those are by type and class, and know that a different class of service could get a different type of method applied to it. Right? So some examples are that in shipping, you could expedite things. You could decide things get delivered on a fixed date. You could actually have a standard amount of work. And then there's some things that are simply intangible. Perhaps your customer service, help desk type of work is something that's really intangible. So some of you said you were using Scrum today. I'll talk a little bit about how you can apply the Kanban technique to Scrum, and it's affectionately referred to as ScrumBon. And I really think that if you're doing Scrum and you're looking for how to take your team to true higher performance, applying the techniques of Kanban will really help you maximize your Scrum. So I have a sample Kanban board we'll talk about later today as well. And you'll notice that these boards have numbers on them and all sorts of different visual signals. Another key aspect, the visualization of the work. This is another very simple project wall that anyone can create. It really just talks about a few steps. You have things are either ready to be worked on, the developers actually have it in work in progress, the developer's done with it, it could be waiting for a tester, the testers have it verified, and then we have the final UAT done column. And you simply move your tasks across the way. Now I know I spoke earlier about David Anderson. He's definitely a very valued resource in the Kanban industry. Corey Lattice has also done some excellent work, and I've also provided a few websites where information is really readily available and easy to find. So with that, thank you very much. And I got through my PK, first one ever.
My name is Jennifer Brownson. I am the Agile Business Analysis Practice Leader for BMC Software. And to let you know how I split my time, I am 25% an Agile coach. I am 25% one-on-one mentor for business analysts in the Agile space. And I am 50% actually working on our enterprise projects. It's very important to me to do both practice and application, okay? So that is my background, and without further ado, let's go ahead and get started. Let's see if I can pull this off. Okay. So, in fiction, this is the only depiction I have ever seen of a business analyst. Deal with customers, we have people skills, we are good at dealing with people. That is what we do, right? No, we do a lot more than that, especially in the Agile space. How many of you guys found out you were going Agile roughly like this? Okay, this is what happens a lot of times when people start going Agile. They find out in a very sudden and unexpected way, and they are told that they will be changing the way that they work, often without a clutch. So, what we are going to talk about for our business analysts is how you take all the work that you have been doing before, use cases, process models, all of this heavyweight stuff, and talk about how it translates to what you will be doing in the Agile space. You use more than you realize. We will also be talking about business strategy and how business strategy fits into what you do now. Here's a hint, you do a lot more of it in the Agile space than you probably did before. We will talk about how you partner with our business owners to do that strategy. Okay? We will talk about Agile roles, the different roles in the Agile world, and how a business analyst fits within those Agile roles. Many of you said that you have blended roles. You are both project managers and business analysts. We will talk about the different options for you and where you might want to go with those roles. We'll talk about product owners, often expected to be visionaries, often not necessarily visionaries. We will talk about ways to pull the things out of them that they need to express. Requirements, elicitation, someone was talking about that earlier. We will talk about how you can work with them. Agile team. This is the group that managed to land Apollo 13 at the time that they found out that they had actually succeeded. Agile teams are different. They are very close. They are very organized. We have a lot of discipline behind what we do. You may, as a business analyst, be part of that Agile team. ScrumMaster, coach, team lead. I include all three. Some people get very upset at the term ScrumMaster. We will talk about other things. This is John Wooden. John Wooden leading the UCLA team. I don't know if you guys know anything about him, but he is a quiet leader. We will be talking about that when you're an Agile lead. We will talk about the framework of Agile, releases, iterations, how things are time-boxed, how they break out, how you work together to do planning with your business owners. We will talk through all of those things in the Agile framework and how you will apply them to the environment that you're in. User stories. Many times with our business owners, we say, what do you want? And they are every bit as perplexed as this child is right now. So we will talk about how we need to help our business pull out these user stories, how they need to be written. It is a very different style than you're probably used to. Prioritization. How many of you have business owners that don't necessarily like each other very much? In the Agile world, they have to agree and they have to prioritize on what they're going to work on. This is the kind of thing that we will talk about as well. How to get our business owners to actually speak to each other even if they have been married for 50 years. Acceptance criteria. Unattended children will be given an espresso and a free puppy. This is excellent. Acceptance criteria, okay? We will talk about how you take a user story and turn it into acceptance criteria that everyone can understand, that your developers can work from, that your business can communicate exactly what it is they want. Okay, emerge. We are going to take all of our fun and we are going to talk about it in practice. BMC is a completely Agile organization from top to bottom, from our CEO down to our junior programmers, not to say anything about junior programmers. BMC was founded in 1980. We have market coverage in more than 124 companies. We have a lot of people. We have 96% of the Forbes Global 100. If you work in the bowels of IT, you probably know who we are. If you do not work in the bowels of IT, you probably deal with Remedy at one point or another. That is ours. When we started adopting Agile at BMC, we started out with this little group down there. We rose in 10 months to having that many people, okay? This transition was not slow. We had to ramp up, we had to go, we didn't have a choice. This is the results of that. 3 times faster to market rates than industry averages, okay? 20 to 50% improvements and 1/4 the number of defects. Very important. That has been a huge focus for us. Trying to make sure that the defects do not even get into the product. We will talk about how that works. Now, all was not peaceful in BMC land when we went through this transition. When you start talking about transparency, having people talk to each other who have not talked to each other before, finding out where we really are on projects and what's going on, you will deal with people getting very upset, very nervous, and figuring out how to work together. We also dealt with a blended environment. We had people still doing what you guys would call traditional waterfall, working with our engineering teams that were really more agile. We had to find a way to blend those two things and transition between them. This was absolutely a challenge that we faced. We got through it with releases and iterations. We'll also talk about retrospectives. We'll talk about what worked and what didn't, because we had both. Obviously, you saw what worked. We'll talk about the things that you have to worry about, okay? And we will talk about indicators that you've got a problem and what you can do to fix those problems and how to move forward and what you need to be successful. 20 seconds left. Any questions? Excellent. Okay. Just to let you guys know, I'm big on being in the classroom, but I'm also big on talking to people offline. So, if you have any questions during breaks, please come and talk to me, sit down with me, tell me what your problems are. I do therapy. Okay? Thank you very much.
Okay, so 2008 was the magic year that Deanna Brown from Yahoo came to Scripps Networks and said everyone was going to do Scrum and no one knew what it was. It was also the year that we had tons of work coming in. We had new acquisitions coming in. We also had a lot of redesigns going on with our websites. We had very static, clunky websites at that time. They're a little bit better now, and we're getting ready to redesign them again. But these are a few of the websites that we had in place at the time. Food Network, JC, Recipes are, which is now food.com. So we're constantly going through change, and the change is very fast. Some of the things that we had to look at, and this is just a quote from my boss, who it can be quite ironic at times when you think back on it. He wanted us to lean in. A little did he know that we would use lean techniques to get there. But he wanted us to lean in and do this with no people, no extra people, and be able to take in all the work and also come back to Scrum and learn how to do that and adjust as well. So, Presto, the Scrum framework, it resolves everything. Well, it's taken us a little bit of time to get there, so I'll walk you through that journey. And I think everyone else is going to walk through some of those pieces as well. Some of the pieces that we'll also talk about are the challenges that we had being an infrastructure and not a development department and trying to implement Scrum. So we'll talk a little bit about that and about the box in the middle with all the sprints and everything on the outside that has to be entertained as well. Another area that we're also going to talk about is just how we thought through our steps through this Agile transition. How we, at the very front end, started walking through how are we going to pilot, how are we going to adopt, and how are we going to optimize. And 4 years later, I think we're at the very beginning of the optimization piece, so it's not a short flip the switch type of process. We also started thinking about what do we need to put into place in each of those 4 steps to try to be at that optimization phase in the very end. And you'll notice a lot of these areas are blue. Those are the areas that we've completed. Ones in black we still have yet to complete. One of the things that came out of our planning in the very beginning of how are we going to adopt Scrum, how are we going to be more agile, more lean, is our project management life cycle. And it starts with Sprint Zero and how we're going to work with the product owner and take in requirements. And we'll go into this in a little bit more depth of how you actually put this all together. The next couple of slides are going to show you just what our models look like. The blue boxes being the infrastructure teams that supported all the different development teams. So you'll see there were about 12 or 13 teams for our back office support. These were the original support model diagrams. And then the next slide will show you the front-end support model, which is a couple of extra teams and very fast-moving teams because these were our front-edge website support teams. In addition to that, as we're putting everything together, we see how much work is coming in. We know we're trying to adopt this process and get everyone else on board. We still have the fact that there is tons of work to do this. So in 2010, just to give you an overview of how much work happened in those 2 years, we had 67% increase in deployments, 36% increase in projects, and 0% increase in team resources, and we were able to take in the work. And that is because of the Scrum process. Would not have been able to do that. So, as 2010 and 2011 has come through, again, we hear our boss saying we need to lean in, we've got more work coming. So, we'll talk a little bit about how we did that, how we've continued to walk through and improve our processes, and try to continually look and see where we can become more and more efficient. So, the realizations: we need to be lean and efficient, we need to do continual process improvement, we need leaders and not heroes, and we'll talk a little bit more about that concept as we walk through it this morning. One other additional thing, I'm trying to remember what the next slide is. We'll look at the tool that we use as well. This was part of how it became a little bit more lean. It's going from a manual Excel spreadsheet to actually using a tool. And we'll talk about how many hours we saved in project management time by going through an automated tool and by keeping the team using this and standing up each day. So we'll look at this a little bit as we go through this morning as well. ScrumWorks Pro, the backlog. This is and I'll give you just a little bit of insight. This is a great drop and drag tool that you can pull the product owners in, you can pull the business in, and they can see exactly what their decisions, how they impact what you're going to work on in each sprint. So it's a very visual interaction. So the main thing that we've really tried to work on to really become more and more efficient is to try to remove the distractions, and we'll talk a little bit more how we've restructured teams to remove those distractions, clear obstacles, use all the tools in our toolbox. Some teams use Kanban, some use Scrum, and we're going to talk a little bit about Enterprise Unified Process, which is adding iteration -1 to the thought process. This is going to show you a little bit of what our Scrum pods look like today. We did end up adding some more people, but it's not many. So we added a few more. We separated teams a little bit, restructured what they worked on, pulled out some of the distractions, and we're seeing some really efficient use of our time. And all these color boxes we'll go through at 11:15, so we can show you how we looked at each different piece of what we were supporting to decide how to restructure these teams so they can be as efficient as possible. So the SNIT, that is our back-end series of development teams. And then here at the end, this is just a quick view of what we're trying to get into now, which is iteration -1. And looking at all the pre-planning work that goes in before a project is actually a project, and trying to make that agile as well. So this is the piece that we'll be going into 2012, and we'll talk a little bit about that at the end. And this just shows how we've changed a little bit. So now we have Travel Channel, we have Food.com, there are a couple of others we have as well. So we're constantly changing, but we'll talk a little bit more about that change at 11:15. So does anyone have any questions? I know that Scrum Pod is something that you know, as we learn in Scrum, we become flexible and we have to adapt to the culture. So one of those things was at Scripps we came up with the term Scrum Pods. And that is because we had to structure groups within infrastructure to be able to support multiple development teams. And that those pods make it clear so that everyone knows who supports them. The infrastructure teams are physically located together, but not with the development teams necessarily. But that could be coming. That's been talked about as well. Anyone else?
Thank you.
So we're ready for the next one. Just so you understand where I'm coming from, my perspective, I've been doing product management for over 15 years ago. Started in medical devices and diagnostics, evolved into online and hosted software, and now do it on a consulting and training basis where we work with companies to help them optimize their product management process. And that's also given me experiences now in everything from ATM machines to slot machines. So a whole different range of stuff. This is the reason, though, I think we need product management and good product management. It's a sad story. 70% of products fail. Next one. And hopefully the role of the product manager can help prevent that. So we'll talk about that. This person who has vision for the product and manages it over a life cycle, right? Not just release to release. The big thing, though, is this person is what we call the problem teller, not the problem solver. Engineering teams are there to solve the problem. The product manager is there to convey what the problem is. Next slide. And then we'll get into talking about what lean product management is. And And this is how I define it: achieving optimal product market fit in record time with fewer resources. And if we think about that as sort of a mathematical expression of that and where product management can influence things, it's about improving fit, decreasing time to market, and then always managing the cost side. And if we do that, we get all these great benefits, like higher satisfaction and increased lifetime value of the customer, a lot less rework because we do it right the first time. And there are ways to measure fit. We'll talk about those in the talk, both before you get your product to market and once it's being used by real users. And these are some of the benefits of improving time to market, right? We get more revenue capture, greater time in the marketplace where our product is differentiated, and also argue we get lower costs from that as well. This is always good to do, obviously lowering costs, and we'll talk about that, but the big thing is there are things that can be game-changing. Now, sort of new applications of technology that can let you dramatically lower costs, not just little efficiency gains. Next. And if you piece it all together, we're going to talk about this, the product market fit triad, where we're trying to understand the problem, and often that gets left out, is fundamentally understanding that, and then matching that with the product and the business model. Everything from pricing, all the services we need to wrap around it. There's 4 major product market fit challenges that I've defined, and understanding which challenge you have will influence which process that you want to use to go about building your product. So that process should be selected at the project level, not at the company level, that this is how we do things. And these are the 4 basic ones: optimized, market-driven, tech-driven, and visionary. There's also 2 business model subtypes we layer in there, and I'll discuss that. And then we need some sort of process loop or learning loop. This one is appropriate for product management. We'll talk about 4 others in the lecture as well. And then some key principles. So this one, pursuing fast, flexible flow, that's a major lean principle. We'll go into some depth on that. We'll talk about the role of design and why it's so important and why it's often omitted and what happens. The need for keeping options open and using set-based modeling for tougher problems. And then really flipping things on its head from going from what we call phase gate, where we line ourselves up by activities, to learning gates. And focusing on gates of learning rather than we'll do all these activities at once. And that takes us to this one, where we sort of change the model that we might be doing anything that we traditionally did in the phase gate process, sort of in phase 1, after we would have only done conceive and plan activities. And if you can't make the session, note that URL at the bottom. You can download a book and read about it if you prefer that way as well. What am I doing for time?
I don't know. I've just been watching.
Okay.
Waiting for my signals.
Any questions?
Practice. So I'm happy to be here and actually get a second chance. And we're going to talk, this talk be quite a bit different than Kanban, and that I'm going to talk about the Agile PMO. And I'll start out by saying the Agile PMO is not a name I like to use, because I think to explain the difference, you'd have to call it a project leadership organization, or a program leadership organization, right? Not management. So a little bit more about me. I've been doing Agile stuff probably since Ken first got his book out. I was one of the early ScrumMasters to get trained. Today, I'm actually a secretary for the Agile Alliance, and I also serve on the Agile Leadership Network board. And I think that part of my success has been the fact that I've been able to make changes as they come along. And that's really what an Agile PMO is about, is helping to facilitate the change and helping other people through the change process, right? Because change, as we know, is very, very hard, right? And we're going to talk as much about the Agile mindset. Project management and project management theory has been around for a long time. The Agile mindset differs in that it really is not about telling people what to do and then counting what they do. It's about actually helping them understand the realm of possibility. Now to do this, all of us are Agilists, are based on something called the Agile Manifesto. And the Agile Manifesto is really a set of values, something else that's a key differentiator. The first of those values is we value individuals and interactions over process and tools. The second value is that we value working software over written documentation. And the working software includes everything from HTML to the help documentation that you need to put out with your product, right? So that's really some key documentation that you want to keep. You never want to get rid of all of the user stuff. And then we also have a focus on customer collaboration. And we talk about it in terms of over-contract negotiation, and not simply in the means of the contract that gets written between the company and their customers. We're talking about the contracts we engage with each other when we're passing documents from, let's say, a requirements document goes into the development organization, right? So we need to be able to really respond to change, right? This is the fourth value, over following a plan. And yes, just so you know, I haven't used a Gantt chart, and I can't even tell you how many years, and I think I'm still pretty successful at delivering projects, right? So I want to talk to you about the Agile PMO, and considering the term Agile PMO is an oxymoron, right? And with that, what is the role of the Agile project manager, program manager, or even product manager, right? And how that differs from perhaps what you might be accustomed to today. So as an oxymoron, right, we're going to talk about, is your PMO really ready for Agile, right? Or are you just really just kind of getting started? And should they all be the same? If you happen to have a project management office today, and you decide you need an Agile project management office, would it be the same? And I'm going to tell you that regardless of the name, right, according to Shakespeare, a rose by any other name would still smell as sweet, right? So the work is still essential. It's still very important. And even if you still call it an Agile PMO, I'll get over it. So it's really not that important. The importance of the Agile PMO is really to provide those guides that the teams need, right? Point them in the right direction. Keep them from really falling off the path that's so important, right? Because we know that when you fall off the path, that's where all the danger really happens. So, to structure an Agile PMO could also be quite different. I've actually worked in several groups that were PMO-esque, right? And they didn't look a lot like what I'll call a standard program management office. And I'll talk about what are some of the structures I've worked in, how they've worked, how we incorporate different people into those groups. And then also talk about what are the metrics. In Agile world, the very key and essential metric you need first is definition of done. And we'll go into some details about how do you actually define what it means to be done, and done at what stage. And then we're going to add in lots of the other metrics that you're probably very familiar with. We'll also cover what are the struggles of an Agile PMO. Done right, the Agile PMO is really helping to facilitate change in the organization. And that is just not an easy job, right? So you'll have some people that will be at one place on the adoption curve, and some folks that are clearly at the other end of that curve. And how do you actually manage all of those things? Well, you do it by actually having tools to help manage some of that work, right? And I can share with you several of the tools that I've used. Some of them are very rudimentary, such as the tools you see here. Big visible charts are essential, and you also don't need to use MS Project, which is another key reason why I like being Agile. One of the key tools every Agilist needs is really to be able to use their skills to help influence change for the better, right? And we'll talk a lot about what does it mean to be an influencer versus being a manager. Okay? This is just an example of one of the project walls. With the company I'm in now, GDIT, this is the first wall I put up in that company, and I can't tell you the letters I got from the other folks in the company. What are you doing taking up this whole wall? What's going on? We need more whiteboard space. And the fact of the matter is I was going against their culture. Right? So we're going to talk a little bit about culture and the role that culture plays in actually establishing an Agile PMO. And you'd be surprised that culture really is one of the key factors in any Agile adoption, and how you could actually work with that culture to help it be successful. So again, thank you for listening to my PK. I've now been through my second one. Feeling a little bit better.
Powerful planning, agile analysis. I'm going to just go right into it. This will be the last slide. As I mentioned, we're going to talk about how analysis and planning come together in Agile, because what we start with are partners. So we have 3 stakeholder groups: the business, the technology, and the customer, and they continually collaborate to plan and prepare requirements for delivery. We'll talk about those 3 different communities of partners and how we pull them together for partners, and some of the differences when you have internal versus external partners. And of course, the partnership is based on a shared envisioning activity, which may actually be iterative. We may continually discover new ideas for our vision, but having the partners have a shared understanding of the vision for the product is essential for the basis for value. So we come back to that concept of fair return or exchange of money, goods, services in kind for something exchanged, and how we have to always have an eye on value, how value is contextual. Different partners have a different view of value through the life cycle of the product, and we're also always looking at risk, product risk as well as process risk. And the highest risk of any product development is around requirements, whether it's what's called scope creep, changing requirements, or whatever. Agile practices amplify this risk. So how we deal with risk is critical for the ongoing activity of discover, prepare, deliver, discover, prepare, deliver, that the partners need to do. And a theme that runs through this is valuing or valuation and planning. So valuing and planning is continual, and one activity feeds another. We have a backlog, the baseline of requirements, which is dynamic. Some of the items might be big and chunky, some will be smaller. And remember, we talked about discover, prepare, and deliver. Well, we get new items into the backlog. Those that are valued, we need to plan and prepare so that we can do that delivery. We'll talk about how the community comes together continually, and the preparation is really key. Planning is an ongoing activity at 3 levels, if you will. The big view, preview, now view. An analogy I've made over the years is boulders, rocks, and pebbles. So regardless of what view you're in, we want to have good structured conversations about the product requirements. And we do this by looking at 7 product dimensions, which incorporate functional and non-functional requirements, with the functional in the center and the non-functional. And we're going to discuss what those are at a very high level, so we have good conversations among the partners. Beginning with the user role. Who? The who. Who are the users that have to interact with the product? Not all users are created equal, just like not all requirements are. We may depict them as personas, actors, actor role maps, different techniques, but we need to decide which ones we need to deliver to at what point in time in planning. The product also has actions. This is where we have the feet. We're doing process, steps, behavior, and some products are more action or transaction oriented than others. But action is one of the things most people think about when they look at features or user stories or epics and so forth. But that action has to act on data. In many products, data is king. We have to understand our data, the types of data, the states of the data, because again, the different planning cycles may require us to address data at different points in time. Now, of course, you notice in the center we have this red thing, and that's on purpose touching the others. And this is about the controls that the product has to enforce. In other words, business policies and rules. And what we have found in looking at these dimensions is we understand the user role, action, and data. We can squeeze down on the business rules so that we don't have to go out trying to search or mine hundreds and thousands of rules. Now, these functional requirements are controlled by non-functional, including the design and implementation constraints. Those must be known and explicit. Often they're part of your technical architecture, things like the languages and databases and so forth, although through planning they may change. Some of the options for those may change. Now, in addition, we have interfaces and we have quality attributes as other product dimensions. Most people think of non-functionals as the quality attributes. So we need to squeeze down or constrain the functional with the non-functional and have good conversations. We actually use, and I'll describe and share some stories of using a mood board so that we have an understanding of these different dimensions. The interfaces here on the left are to humans, systems, and devices. And once again, using low fidelity techniques and work on wall with good conversations, we can have product champions make decisions about which interfaces are needed at what point in time. And of course, we have the quality attributes: reliability, usability, maintainability, security, testability, etc., etc. You can't have them all. And many of them have trade-offs. And we don't want to implement them too early, but we also don't want to implement them too late. So a lot of teams I'm working with, we're looking at these quality attributes and making them part of the road mapping when we're planning the product. We look at those 7 dimensions at each level of granularity, and we make sure that we can have the same kind of conversation using those 7 product dimensions, regardless of whether we're talking about big view, preview, or now view. So this has the effect of having deeper conversations so we can slice the requirements in the backlog for value. We take an element and we explore options, use transparent value criteria to then evaluate and make the plan for that level of planning. And we use this over and over again, and it literally takes minutes. But sometimes the conversation's not over unless you can give explicit examples. We use examples or scenarios to explore the requirements. That also validates to make sure we have the right requirements. Tests end up becoming a way to execute the examples and verify the requirements. And in this way, we have rich conversations where all the partners, business, technology, and customer have really good structured conversations to have a shared understanding of product needs throughout ongoing planning and preparation. I think that's it. Any questions?